Good morning, everyone. We are going to give it about 4 more minutes and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Good morning, everyone. The meeting is being recorded. Also, make sure that your cell phones and your mics are muted unless speaking. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We are going to give it 1 more minute. All right, it is 9:05. We are going to go ahead and get started. We wanted to welcome everyone to today's Contracts and Compliance meeting. Today is March 26th, 2024. I will do a quick overview of the agenda. Just a quick reminder for folks to please make sure that you are muted if you're not speaking. And that way that will help kind of minimize background noise. Thank you so much. So we'll go ahead and get started with an overview of the agenda, and we have a few brief announcements. So I'll kick off with those. The first one is around the care coordination work group. So as you all might recall, we talked about reaching out to all of you who had previously participated in the previous care coordination work group to provide input for the rules. And we have sent out a doodle poll to reconvene that group. Our next set of items that we'll be reviewing together include the risk stratification methodology, the health risk assessment, and the care coordination report will come after that. We have a few dates that have been identified through the doodle poll, that it's looking like it's going to likely be, and we're going to reserve all of these dates just in case we need all of that time. So we're looking at convening that group on April 8th, April 16th, and April 23rd. We are missing a few representatives from EO, CCO, and YCCO, so I wanted to just kind of put that out there in case you all have not seen the doodle poll. If you want to go ahead and complete that doodle poll to have your folks engaged in that conversation, would appreciate it. And I think I think that maybe covers it for the care coordination work group. Moving on to a really quick update on new kind of team members. So the quality assurance team is growing. As I mentioned last time, we had some folks join us in January, and we now have a second wave of folks that are joining us. We are restructuring into 3 teams within the overall quality assurance team. So there is a quality assurance, quality of care team. Leslie Ains, who is on the screen there and waving hello to everybody, is going to be the manager of that team. We also have a CCO engagement and collaboration team, and Sarah Miller is the manager of that team. And finally, we will have a performance analytics team. And that person is going to start at the beginning of next month. So with that, when we'll go into kind of more in future sessions, we'll go a little bit more into what that restructure means for us. So an overview of the agenda for today, we are going to jump into a quick update of the deliverable alignment project and more to come in the future. But we wanted to make sure that we kind of bring back that work and continue to update you all in terms of where we are in the process. And then we'll jump into the bulk of our conversation today, which will really be around proposed significant changes for the 2025 contracts. Cheryl will be our tour guide through those changes. And then finally, we'll wrap up with a group discussion around HRSN services. And there have been quite a few questions around NOABDs and whether those need to be issued for those services that are denied as HRSN covered benefit, but may be approved under HRS. So we'll be getting into that discussion as well. And with that, we'll jump into our first presentation. All right, so I'm going to spend a ton of time kind of going through the initial slides here. You all should be fairly familiar. But just as a quick reminder, when we started this project, the deliverable redesign project, our primary objectives were to vet all of the deliverables for purpose and value, create requirement categories, and really focus, excuse me, on those core deliverables. So we identified several, I believe it's 13 categories of deliverables. And within those categories, we've identified some of those core deliverables that are kind of going to be the key deliverables that we'll be looking at for that particular category. And then finally, the last goal was really to automate the deliverable submission process for data tracking and analysis, and that is the portal was kind of the beginning of that process. And we are continuing to make refinements to that with your help and your tickets that you submit to us to help us improve that process. On to the next slide, please, Anne. Thank you so much, Anne. So as I mentioned, we have identified several deliverable categories in these areas. These build upon the, so really quickly for those who maybe are not in front of a screen, as I mentioned, we've identified 13 categories. We have the behavioral health category, care coordination, community engagement, encounter and enrollment data, financial, fraud, waste, and abuse, grievances and appeals, health equity, health information systems, member materials, NEMT, network adequacy, PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, and quality improvement and the subcontractor and provider categories. And all of these kind of build upon the base requirements related to federal statute, Oregon statute, and Oregon administrative rules. And then also, excuse me, layered on top of the compliance monitoring review and EQRO processes. And that is the external quality review organization requirements that are imposed by federal CMS. So this slide kind of shows you a more comprehensive list of the categories that I just covered on the previous slide and those core deliverables associated with the individual categories. There are obviously other additional deliverables that are associated with these categories, and we'll get into that in the next few slides. But these core deliverables are really supposed to be the deliverables that give us the ability to really look at the performance of CCOs across all of these various categories. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just kind of walk through where we are currently with the deliverable redesign and really take a look at each of these individual categories and those core deliverables that I mentioned, and then also the additional or supplementary deliverables that might exist in each of these areas. And again, we're only talking here about a subset of deliverables. I think these are kind of going to be really our core focus for this work. But we may identify that through these conversations here together and in other conversations, we may identify that there is a need to look at some of those other deliverables that may not be included on this list. And I really welcome you all to kind of put that forward and provide us with that feedback because that will help us identify where there might be challenges or where there might be deliverables that need a look, need to be reviewed and need a kind of maybe some revamping potentially. So starting with the first category around behavioral health, we have the comprehensive behavioral health plan. We are currently having some internal discussions at an upcoming meeting. I know you all just provided some feedback during the behavioral health directors meeting, and we are going to be looking at that deliverable again for the 2024 submission. So that's due later on this year. And the hope is to bring that to the April contracts and compliance meeting to get some feedback from everyone on that particular deliverable and kind of determine if we continue with the current approach or if we make some modifications to that deliverable moving forward. The next set of deliverables that you see here, the System of Care Statewide Committee Report, the Quarterly IIBHT Report, and the Behavioral Health PMP attestation, those are all kind of, actually I should maybe stop and maybe just limit it to the two previous bullet points. So the SOC Statewide Committee Report and the Quarterly IIBHT Report, those are pending OHA review. We do have some folks on the quality assurance team that are going to be serving as kind of liaisons with the behavioral health subject matter experts that are responsible for these deliverables and working with them to identify opportunities to revise those deliverables or update those deliverables. And so as we kind of do that work and identify potential changes or potential opportunities to improve those deliverables, we'll bring that forward to contracts and compliance. We don't currently have a timeline for that, but the hope is that we'll have those discussions kind of throughout the year and obviously give you all enough time to kind of implement the changes to those reports well before, and especially thinking about, you know, those reports that have a very specific reporting period, ensuring that we are rolling out those changes in advance of those reporting periods. And for the behavioral health P&P attestation, we are working on that criteria currently. And as soon as we have that criteria updated, we'll be releasing that. And that will be an attestation deliverable. And then lastly, the wraparound PMPs and the system of care PMPs attestations, those are complete at this point in time. However, there may be additional changes, as I mentioned, in our work ahead, where we may identify, additional improvements for future contract years. Any questions before I move on on the behavioral health pieces? I know there's been some conversation, so I want to just pause and see if there's anything before I move on. Okay, I don't see anything, but I would invite you all to drop anything in the chat or raise your hand if anything comes up for you. The care coordination deliverables and this category in general is in development. As you all know, we have revised rules that went into effect on February 1st, and there's a lot of work to do to be able to kind of revise the deliverables that we previously had in place. So the care coordination report will need to be overhauled, I think. And so we'll be doing that work together in the care coordination work group once we wrap up the risk stratification methodology and the work on the health risk assessment. But that's kind of the venue, I guess, where we will be discussing that particular report. And then the care coordination PNPs, we are going to target release of that criteria in May 2024. We need to obviously go through and develop new criteria that aligns with the rule changes that were just rolled out and are now effective. And so there's some work to do on that front, and that will likely require a review for 2024 just because the criteria is changing significantly from what it was previously in the ICC PNPs. So there will probably be, excuse me, some work to do on that front. Moving on to the next two categories. There's so the community engagement category, as you all know, we've been having quite a few conversations around the CHON, the CHIP, during these meetings, during previous meetings. And that review for those deliverables is complete for 2024 reporting. As I mentioned, there may be, additional work and feedback that is gathered for future reporting purposes. But for 2024, we are close to wrapping that up and should be rolling that out very soon in the next few days, actually. Moving on to encounter and enrollment data, as we discussed during our last meeting here together, we do not have any changes for the 2024 reporting. As a reminder, that process is really based on CMS requirements, and so there isn't a ton of room for changes there, but that's where we are with that category. Next slide, please, Anne. All right, fraud, waste, and abuse. We have the annual and quarterly fraud, waste, and abuse audits, and then the referral and investigation reports. Those two were reviewed by the subject matter experts in OPI. And given some of the recent changes that have been made to those deliverables, there aren't any changes that are being proposed for 2024. However, again, this work is kind of going to be an iterative cycle, and we'll be revisiting all of these deliverables as we move forward to identify any future changes for future contract years. And then the last item here, in terms of the annual submissions of the prevention handbook, the assessment report, and the prevention plan, we will need to kind of revisit that once the evaluations for 2024 are complete. As a reminder, those came in at the end of January, and those reviews are currently underway. But once we're able to kind of assess where all of the CCOs are, we may need to make changes to the requirements basically for those deliverables. But we really can't speak to that at this point in time until we have those evaluation results. All right, jumping, sorry, Anne, back to the last slide. Apologies, I was coughing over here. So in terms of the grievance and appeals category, just touching on the quarterly grievance and appeals system report and then the sample of NOABDs. For the first one, as I mentioned during our last conversation, we are going to have a work group that is going to convene internally, and it will include CCO representatives. And we are hoping that that work group will come up with some recommendations to improve that quarterly reporting. The expectation is that we will be able to bring that to this group and maybe have a conversation about those recommendations around October of 2024, and then roll out those changes to be effective for next year. And then the sample of NOABDs, that is one that needs OHA review. We have not started that process, but hoped to tackle that particular item. And really, I think where the opportunities are to make adjustments is really in terms of the criteria for the review of those sample of NOABDs. I think we will need to continue to pull those samples because that is kind of one of the key monitoring mechanisms that we have for to ensure that those NOABDs are complete and accurate, and that appropriate denials are not services are not being denied inappropriately. And then finally, for the grievance and appeal system PNPs and the member notice templates, those have rolled out already. We made modifications to both of those to modify them to be attestation only. And again, we will revisit, for 2025 as needed. For the health equity category, we have several of these are currently pending OHA review. We have kicked off some conversations around the language access deliverables, and we'll maybe, there have been kind of an identification of various challenges in this particular area for language access, and so there may be some future conversations that we bring forward here to contracts and compliance to help us identify how we can improve in this particular area. Same goes for the health equity plan. No changes for 2024, but for 2025, we will be kicking off that conversation soon to identify how that particular deliverable changes in 2025. And then finally, the THW integration and utilization reports. There have been some conversations that have started around some changes to that particular report within the THW Commission. And specifically a template for the payment grid is being floated, and there will also be some additional discussions for that particular report that are going to take place within the THW Commission venue. Next slide, please, Anne. So health information systems category. The HIT roadmap, that is complete for 2024. However, we are going to be revisiting that one as well for 2025 and kind of identifying if there are other opportunities to modify that deliverable. And then jumping down to the member materials category, we're currently with reviewing the member handbook criteria and the member handbook template, model handbook, and that hopefully we're gathering kind of input from our subject matter experts internally within OHA, and hopefully we can bring that forward to our April contracts and compliance meeting. And then the NEMT Rider Guide and the Moral Objections Policy, those two are not deliverables that we have started yet to review, but those are pending OHA review and hopefully items that we can review in the very near future. And then member notices, these are kind of the, broadly speaking, all of the other member notices that are submitted to OHA for review and approval. No changes for 2024, but we will be revisiting that entire process as a whole and determining if there are any changes to make to the process itself for 2025. Because there's so much diversity in terms of the notices that you all submit for that process, there may not be any changes to the actual individual, I guess, notice requirements. But maybe there are some opportunities to improve the process. In terms of the next category, NEMT, we have the quarterly NEMT report and the NEMT incident reports. The quarterly NEMT report conversation is pending OHA review. There's already been some kind of initial work started internally to consider opportunities for improvement to that report. And I believe that we are going to be bringing forward to the next CCO advisory committee meeting, the TAC, bringing forward a conversation to gather input from you all on that quarterly NEMT report to identify what is working and what is not working, and is there information in that report that is not, you're not able to track easily or kind of gather that particular data. So that conversation will kick off shortly. And then call center script attestation and NEMT PMP attestation, those are complete for now. Again, we might be revisiting those for future contract years, but for the moment they are complete. And then finally, the financial category, there are these are kind of pending OHA review. There's some conversation that has happened about combining other deliverables with some of these Exhibit L reports. In particular, the share spending report. And so some of that work will continue, and updates will be provided, I believe, through the rates work group, but I'm going to see if Dave has anything to add there.
Sorry, having some issues with my mic. The rates work group would be the primary source of information there. We'll continue to keep you updated here, but the bulk of the work will take place through the rates work group.
Thank you, Dave. All right. So with that wraps up that update. And as I said, we will keep bringing these deliverables forward that are pending OHA review, and engaging you all in conversations to help us identify how we can improve those deliverables. With that, I'm gonna see if there are any questions before I hand it off to my friend Cheryl.
Not a question, but thank you, Veronica. It's helpful to have this outlined in this manner.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Well, if anything comes up, and we can circle back. So with that, I'm gonna hand it off to Cheryl Henning, who is gonna be our tour guide through all of the significant changes. Next slide, please, Anne. Thank you, Anne.
Okay, away we go. I hope you all can hear me. If not, let me know. So good morning. I'm Cheryl Henning, CCO Contract Administrator, she, her pronouns. So this morning we'll have 6 presentations from OHA staff about proposed significant changes for the 25 CCO contracts. So this is a subset of potentially 26 changes that are being presented to CCOs in assorted meetings. And these presentations are part of the process to determine whether these changes will actually be included in the contract. So we are very interested in CCO input about the changes. So in addition to taking feedback at the end of each presentation, we'll also accept written feedback through the end of this week, and we'll put those email addresses in the chat and also follow up after the meeting with them as well. So in terms of this overall process, after these presentations, the next step is that staff will present them internally in our C2M group, which is a collection of division leadership, managers, including Medicaid leadership, and high-level policy analysts for approval consideration. And so in fact, today's changes are scheduled to be discussed at next week's C2M meeting, which is why we need your feedback for sure by the end of this week. So if a particular change is approved by C2M, then CCOs will see it as contract language in the draft that goes out in mid-June, and you can give feedback on that language as well. So we have about an hour to get through today's presentation, so we will be efficient and focused. And we're going to start with Brenna and Maria, and this is change number 2 per my tracking log, which is to require phone tree instructions to explain interpreter access and call answering language. It'll make a lot more sense once they dive in, but I will hand off now to Brenna. I know she's here. Not sure yet if Maria's here. So Brenda, oh, there's Maria. Hi, Maria. We have both Brenda and Maria. And so again, we have about an hour for all 6, and we're gonna keep it moving. It's all yours now. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Cheryl. Can you hear me? Perfect.
Yep.
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Brenna. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white queer woman calling in from my home office with a blue background. I have shoulder length, dark blonde hair, and I'm wearing green glasses. And I'll pass the proverbial mic to Maria to introduce herself as well.
Thank you, Brenna. Good morning, everyone. Maria Elena Castro, she, her pronouns. Health, Equity, Innovation, and Implementation Manager at the Equity and Inclusion Division. A pleasure to be here with you today.
Awesome. So with that, we'll just keep going. Next slide, please. So Maria and I are here to talk to you about proposed language to change and clarify some requirements around customer service phone call lines. So this proposed change would require CCOs and their subcontractors' customer service call center to provide a welcome message in, at minimum, English and Spanish, with clear and accurate instructions in both or all pre-recorded languages, advising the caller how to navigate the call system. When we say CCO and subcontractor, we're really specifically trying to call out CCO, NEMT, DCO, and then any behavioral health, vision, or pharmacy numbers that are member facing. So with that, on to the next bullet point, the rule change must allow the CCO and their subcontractors' customer service call line staff to view whether a caller has requested an interpreter. The CCO and their subcontractor may establish a dedicated queue for callers requesting languages other than English. And verbal instructions in both or all languages should clearly state what to do if a caller wants an interpreter or to speak a language other than English. Next slide, please. If a CCO or subcontractor's customer service phone lines have press X for language, pre-recorded instructions on the phone line, lines should be answered by multilingual staff in the requested language whenever possible. If not possible, the call should be answered with an interpreter already on the line that speaks the requested language. Recorded verbal instructions in a language other than English should clarify whether the line may be answered in English. If the call will be answered in English, pre-recorded non-English message should instruct the caller to verbally state their need for an interpreter and which language they need when the call is answered. Okay, next slide. So why make this change in 2025? This change addresses additional barriers within the current system that hinders non-English speaking members from accessing resources and supports that English speakers can easily access. Currently, a Spanish-speaking OHP member can call their CCO, follow recorded instructions, and select the Spanish-speaking line, but still have the call answered in English by a non-bilingual staff person who then may provide instructions to the member to stay on the line and wait for an interpreter in English. These are often not accessible to members who don't speak English. As such, CCOs and their subcontractors' current phone line systems are primarily serving English speakers with no clear member-friendly instructions for non-English speakers. The changes will bring member-facing phone trees into alignment with the intent of the Meaningful Access Guidelines already in place through state and federal law, and these changes support OHA's goal of eliminating health inequities by 2030, which is the foundation of OHA's strategic plan. Next slide, please. Okay, we expect there to be no impact on CCO deliverables as a result of this change. Next slide. A few questions for CCOs. Before I read these questions aloud, Maria, do you have anything you want to add to the information I've gone over? Okay, perfect. So a list of 4 questions here that we'd love to hear answers to. Also welcome to any other feedback. You're welcome to come off mute and or send it in the chat. I will also provide my email if you want to provide any written feedback as well. So question 1, has your organization done any recent work on updating phone call line instructions or language access policies for call centers? Is there any training or technical assistance that your organization might need to support this work? How long do you anticipate needing to implement these changes? Particularly curious to hear about that piece. And then do you have any questions or clarifications from our team that might be helpful? All right.
Okay, Jane, you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thank you. I think, while it's not required, your instruction about wanting the interpreter to already be on the line when a member needs an interpreter, we're not going to know ahead of time. The way call queues are set up, we may not know what language that member needs exactly when that call is answered. So I think that's a little, I just think that piece is going to be difficult to implement. I know we can find ways to make changes that will help in this area, but that's one that kind of jumps out at me.
Okay, thank you.
Jane, can I ask you something real quick before we take the
Sure.
next question? Do you see that as something that you could potentially do with certain languages that you know you're going to have a larger population, a larger number of your members speaking a non-English language? Are there particular languages that you might be able to do that for?
Well, the way the IVR works is it automatically, if you have them in a queue, it's going to automatically connect that person as the phone lines clear. So I think that makes it difficult and more time on hold for the members when we do that. We can get interpreters on the line very quickly. And I think if we provide adequate instructions on the front end so that they know to ask for an interpreter and that we'd be happy to get one for them, I think that would probably be the most member-friendly way to handle this.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane. And I do just think it might be worth clarifying that the intent of the policy, and I believe the way that it's worded, is such that that requirement is only in place if your instructions tell the member that the call will be answered in the language they select. So if your instructions say the call may be answered in English, be prepared to state your need, then it's not a concern. But if you set yours up such that the member is told it will be answered in their language, we just want to ensure that that will be parallel with what actually happens. So I think, you know, what your capabilities are a little bit flexible, and hopefully it's worded in a way such that it reflects that.
I understand. I think it maybe could use a little more clarification.
Thank you. I did note your comment and we will take a look at it. I see somebody else has their hand up.
I think I saw Monica. Your hand isn't up anymore, so I'm not sure if you don't have a comment any longer, but feel free to chime in if you do. Okay, Jane, I don't know if you were trying to put your head down or wanted to
I'm
speak
trying to put my
again?
hand down. Thank you.
Okay, okay. Anyone else?
I will just read that we had a question in the chat, which confirms that it's for member-facing phone trees only, the answer to which is yes.
And then I would like to maybe just flag that there may be a potential impact on the NEMT call center script deliverable in the context of kind of incorporating some of this information into that deliverable. So just wanted to call that out because it wasn't flagged as a being potentially impacted. I don't see any other hands right now.
So
I
Veronica,
do see a
quickly,
question from Chris.
Yeah, perfect. So
Thank
the
you.
question is, are all languages required or only prevalent languages? Right now, we are only requiring English and Spanish, and any other prevalent languages in the CCO's region are at your discretion, whether or not you want to add instructions and processes for those languages. And then I see another comment. I agree with Jane's comment on the difficulty of having an interpreter already on the line. Thanks for that, Steph, and I will note that as well.
Any other comments, whether written or anyone want to offer any verbal feedback? Jacob, go ahead.
I don't know if we got the exact language a few slides back, but I just would like to suggest that we use the term subcontractor. We'd be mindful in how we're using that. I think you're trying to impose a couple different limitations here, that it's a subcontractor and then also that it's member facing, and let's make sure we structure that in a way so we don't include organizations we don't intend to include, I guess.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks.
Jacob.
Yep.
Jenna, do you
Jenna.
want to go ahead?
Jenna Harms with Yamhill Community Care. My question is similar to what Jacob was bringing up. I think I was questioning what member-facing services or call lines would this impact. So we have our main customer service, and then there are a variety of other phone numbers and places where members may be able to make connections, like our care coordination lines, or as Veronica, you spoke to, NEMT, or other types of subcontractor services. And so I'm just trying to understand how far-reaching these rules or these contract requirements would reach.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Jenna. So the intent is that any member-facing customer service line for which the numbers are publicly provided to your members would be covered by this contract update. So the examples I gave during the presentation were NEMT, DCOs, or dental customer service call lines, behavioral health customer service call lines. If your CCO has a customer service call line that they provide for vision or for pharmacy, those would also apply. And it sounds like you guys might also have a public-facing care coordination call line, which this would also apply to. So again, it's any member-facing customer service call lines where numbers for those lines are provided publicly to all members to access care or resources through.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Jenna. So I know we're on a tight schedule. Absolutely welcome any more feedback. I did put my email in the chat. Folks are welcome to reach out to me via email with any more feedback or thoughts that you come up with. And Veronica or Cheryl, I don't know when my time exactly is up, but I'll hand it back to either of you or any more comments we have.
And Cheryl, can you please just do a quick reminder on the amount of time that CCOs have for feedback?
It is through this week. And so I will send an email follow-up after this meeting to say that plainly to everyone as well. And it'll include all the email addresses as well.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Great. So we're going to move on to our next item. Thank you, Brenna and Maria. So our next item, it is number 8 on my trekking list. We'll have Nicholas Lurvik from the soon-to-be Behavioral Health Division, currently still with HSD. And he's going to talk about the addition of LGBTQIA2S+ to the culture and culturally and linguistically appropriate SUD services list. So Nicholas, I see you right there. Take it away.
Hi, thank you, Cheryl. Hello, everyone. As Cheryl was saying, my name is Nicholas Lurvik. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a policy analyst here at OHA. We will be going through this significant but relatively small change to the contract. So this change actually came about due to an error that we discovered as we were going through the CCO contract and the Behavioral Health Policies and Procedures deliverable. So this change would be adding LGBTQIA2S+ to the populations that are listed in the contract, for which CCOs must provide specialized trauma-informed SUD services that are provided in environments that are culturally and linguistically appropriate. Like I said, this came about due to a review of the Behavioral Health Policies and Procedures, which for the past few years has included the acronym for this population, but upon looking into the corresponding section in the CCO contract, we found that that was not listed. That specifically is Exhibit M, Section 7, concerning SUD. Next slide, please. So like I was saying, it's not currently listed in contract. So the purpose of this change would be to add that into contract. This was previously, like I said, in the P&Ps. So CCOs should already have it in their P&Ps. The goal of adding this is to is in line with OHA's goal of eliminating health inequities by 2030. We want to call out this population specifically, in addition to other minoritized communities that are already called out in this list in contract, to ensure that we're able to assist CCOs in providing culturally and linguistically specific services to this population. This population has been part of OHA's ongoing equity work. So that's sort of the background as to why we want to make sure this is specifically called out, again, in addition to several other minoritized communities, so they can receive culturally appropriate and specific care. Next slide, please. So again, CCOs should already have this in their policies and procedures, as it was for the past several years included in our policies and procedures evaluation criteria. So we would encourage you, if you have it already in your P&Ps, to keep it in there. We will have to, unfortunately, remove it from this year's P&P evaluation criteria, and then if and when this is approved in the CCO contract, be adding that back in, since in order to have that in P&Ps, it needs to be in the corresponding section of the CCO contract. Next slide. So just a couple questions for y'all. We wanted to just check in and see if any CCOs feel that adding the LGBTQIA2S+ piece into the contract, and then also again into the behavioral health P&Ps will cause any burdensome changes in terms of how you will ensure culturally specific or appropriate services are delivered to your members. And additionally, we wanted to check in and see if there's any way that we as OHA can help support you as CCOs in providing culturally specific and appropriate services to the LGBTQIA2S+ population. So any feedback? Yeah, Deanne.
Good morning. A little bit of feedback, not pushing back on the requirement. It's more some general musings that I would hope we could think about a little bit. I'm a little bothered by calling it out in specific service areas versus overarching contract language, because I think that there's almost a, it almost infers that this requirement is in some manner not applicable to other areas if it's not directly called out. And so that just kind of bothers my little social work psyche, and would actually recommend that this be language that was an overall statement and not specific to service areas. But again, just I'm not pushing back on the inclusion. I'd share that one thing that YCCO has done is we included a spot in our request to contract for, new providers looking to join our network to have the, voluntary option of sharing racial identities as well as LGBTQIA2S plus identity, so that we can have that information should our members be seeking those specific characteristics in the practitioners that they're seeking service from. So, I mean, it's certainly something that's important and we support, but I just sort of throw those thoughts out for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. I definitely appreciate that and agree. This, just as a caveat, I think this is a small piece of adding this into contract and specifically concerning the behavioral health P&Ps, certainly in alignment with our goal of eliminating health inequities. We do want this to be more overarching with this population and other populations in terms of how we're talking about minoritized communities and how they're able to access culturally specific services. So fully agree. Definitely, as an organization, I think we want to be moving forward with that very point you made in mind as we're looking holistically at the CCO contract and also just how we're dealing with services in general and focusing equity. Any other feedback?
Thank you, folks. Thank you, Nicholas. And Nicholas will put his email address in the chat, and we'll follow up with that in case there are any bits of feedback that CCOs want to provide in writing. I'm going to keep us moving along. We have about a half an hour to do the remaining 4 presentations. So our next one, it is number 11 on my tracking list. And we have Tiffany Regan to talk about requiring use of the CCO model member handbook.
Okay, thank you so much. Next slide, Anne. I'm Tiffany Regan, she, her pronouns, and I'm an engagement analyst on the quality assurance team. I'm going to keep us moving real quick. This change is probably not a surprise to anybody. We're going to try to align with CFR to require CCOs to adopt the model handbook. And so here's a little piece from CFR if you're interested. The CFR has technically been effective since 2016, but we've just not been able to update and implement until now. And so our hope is to put this into the contract and get up to compliance. Next slide. So why are we doing this? We are trying to, like I mentioned before, implement as soon as possible to bring OHA into compliance. We also want to reduce potential findings during the evaluations of model handbooks, which is going to shorten time needed for reviews and just ensure that language is consistent across the board for members. Next slide. Thank you. Most CCOs are actually already using the model member handbook to craft handbook content. So it's not really going to have a huge impact on deliverables. It will hopefully make it a little easier to move through the process of model handbooks. I have a couple important notes I really wanted to call out for us. So if we do implement this change, a significant change, that we're not going to be requiring any specific formatting, font types, graphics, except the standard accessibility and readability requirements we already require. So we're not asking you to change your branding. We're not asking you to change your style. We're just asking you to change the content and to match it to the model handbook. Right now, we are currently revising the model handbook. As Veronica mentioned earlier, we have some revisions happening, and those will be posted both to the model handbook and the criteria on June 2nd of this year. Next slide, please. We have a couple questions for y'all. What barriers are you experiencing or have you experienced implementing the model handbook? What would make using the model handbook easier and more successful for your CCO? And then I do have another call out. We did send a CCO survey via the weekly update a couple weeks ago, and we have links here in the presentation just to get more specific feedback. And so if you have information in addition to the barrier conversations we're talking about now, please let us know and we can use the survey for that. I'll also drop my email in the chat at the end of this. Okay, I'll stop talking and see if there's any questions or feedback.
We do have a question in the chat, Tiff from Anne. Will there be work done with HSAG to ensure that CCOs using the model handbook will not get findings from HSAG on that handbook?
Thank you, Anne. That's a really great question. So we're actually doing a little bit of extra work this year to ensure that we make sure we're aligning with HSAG. They are reviewing the entire handbook for us right before we post it. So they're going to be looking through the handbook to make sure that we're aligned.
And I would just add that I think maybe a reminder that the review that HSAG is carrying out is really specific to the requirements in CFR. And so, hopefully what Tiffany just described will help mitigate any differences that might occur, but that does not mean that there may not be findings. So I just want to be very clear about that because we may be looking at things slightly differently based on our review criteria, meaning what HSAG is using versus what we, the quality assurance team, are using for our reviews.
Thank you for that call
So,
out.
and then we have another one in the chat for us from Mina. If there could also be a Spanish model handbook, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mina. We will take that back. We have not talked about that for this next iteration, but we'll definitely take that back to the team.
And then a comment from Courtney Johnston: you should align criteria to ensure compliance with what you require us to use. And that is part of the work that we are doing currently. But again, if there is a slight nuance in terms of what HSAG is looking for that we may not be looking for, the criteria might be the same on the face of it, but it really comes down to kind of the context within which they are reviewing. But we are going to do our best to try to align them for sure. And then I think I have several hands up. Michelle Campbell, do you want to go first?
I'm from Pacific Source. I think this is a great change, so thank you. We're already using that model handbook and haven't seen too many barriers. I'll put this in the survey as well, but if we could have maybe additional model language for the medical benefits and dental benefits charts, just so that that is maybe aligned a little bit more. And then also omitting the page number references and maybe referencing sections instead. We have seen quite a few issues with this, especially when it comes to getting translations or alternate formats, because that will shift the page numbers. So it's really hard to manage that when it's referencing certain pages, especially with so many references throughout.
Thank you, Michelle. Those are very good points. We really appreciate that.
All right, Anne, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so can we go back to that variability in what OHA is looking for versus HSAG? Because it really leaves us in kind of a bind as a CCO, because if we get findings on the on the model template of the member handbook, then if we change our handbook to get in line with HSAG, then are we out of alignment with OHA because we're no longer using your handbook? So if there's any way that you all could work that out with HSAG up front so you're not looking for different things, that would be really helpful for us.
Thank you. Yes, we are doing quite a bit more coordination than we have in past years, and so we'll definitely take that back in. Okay. I think we might have time for like one or two more questions, and then we'll wrap up and take questions via email or feedback via email.
Lindsay has one question in the chat, whether we're still accepting feedback, and it sounds like the survey is probably still open, but can you maybe speak a little bit more to that?
Yes, the survey's still open. I'll drop the survey link in the chat, and then I'll also drop my email. I just want to make sure that we are very clear about if we're giving the feedback for model handbook content versus the requirement of using it overall. And so that feedback needs to be to us by the end of this week, and then specific information around the model handbook, content, etc., can be given afterwards. Thank you, Lindsay. So yes, we will definitely drop those links in the chat so everyone can participate in the feedback survey.
And again, we hope to bring this topic forward to contracts and compliance in April so that we can maybe have more discussion around some of those areas that you all are seeing that could be improved in the model handbook. And thank you for what
Okay.
you've shared today.
Thanks so much.
Thanks,
I
Ted.
will give it back to Cheryl.
Thank you all. So now we will get a double dose of Summer Cox. She has 2 presentations to cover, and we have about 25 minutes left for both of hers, and then also a third presentation. So Summer is going to do 2 different changes related to subcontractor responsibilities, and I'm just going to let you take it away. And thank you, Summer.
Thanks, Cheryl. Good morning, everyone. My name is Summer Cox. Use she, her pronouns, and I'm a CCO Quality Assurance and Compliance Specialist with the CCO QA and Contract Oversight Team. So as Cheryl mentioned, I'm going to walk through the proposed changes to the CCO subcontractor report section first, and then we'll talk about Exhibit I. Note that these changes are applicable to all contracts, Medicaid, non-Medicaid, and OHP Bridge. The first change we're proposing here is to define the term downstream entity within contract and or rule. What you see here on your screen is just a rough draft. It basically states that downstream entity means any party that enters into a written agreement with the CCO subcontractor. This is either going to be a standalone term in contract or it will be combined within the current subcontractor definition. Either way, we just want to ensure that the subcontractual relationships between CCO subcontractors and their delegates are captured within contract. The next set of changes includes revising the required elements of the subcontractor performance report deliverable to get a little more specific to include the following. So we've got date completed, the look back period it pertains to, a list of reviews and deliverables used to monitor the subcontractor's performance, and a list of any missing, late, or incomplete deliverables and the follow-up action taken to resolve them. Next slide, please. Okay, the list of elements goes on to include the outcome of the overall assessment of subcontractors' performance, be it compliant, partially compliant, or non, with those contractual requirements. How often the employees of the subcontractor are screened and monitored for federal exclusion from participation in Medicaid. An indication of whether the subcontractor is monitoring its downstream entities where applicable, and the final outcome of the subcontractor's compliance program review, along with any compliance findings that have been identified by OHA related to work performed by the subcontractor and or the downstream entity where applicable, and how those findings will be or were remediated. Now, please note that external quality review findings from HSAG are excluded from this element. Additionally, we're going to be adding references to evaluation criteria and or guidance documents provided by OHA. Next slide, please. Now, for the subcontractor corrective action plans, also known as CAPs, we're expanding the language in this section to include other documented remediation activities. So that could include things like improvement plans, technical assistance calls, or whatever form of remediation your plan uses. The terminology used here is not as important as the activity itself, which is documenting the findings and remediation. Further, when findings do come up, the CCO shall cause the subcontractor to initiate a CAP or other documented remediation activity within 30 days of deficiency confirmation. Next slide. Now, the CAP and other remediation activity submission to OHA should include the date that the CAP or remediation activity was requested from the subcontractor, how the deficiencies were identified, via compliance review, ongoing monitoring, complaint, any other means, the date those deficiencies were identified, the deficiency details, like what, how, when, where, who was impacted, and the root cause of those deficiencies. And again, as with the subcontractor report section, we're going to be adding references to evaluation criteria and our guidance documents that will be provided by OHA. Next slide. So why are we making these changes? Well, we want to ensure that contract language, eval tools, and guidance documents are all in alignment to better support CCO's understanding and really provide clarity regarding the content of those subcontractor-related deliverables. We also need to ensure that subcontractors are regularly monitoring their downstream entities and identify all the deliverables that CCOs are using to perform subcontractor monitoring. We want to expand the corrective action plan, as I mentioned before, to include other documented remediation activity and ensure that the subcontractor deficiencies are identified and rectified timely, including root cause. Now, those changes really just clarify our current contract requirements with a more detailed list as opposed to the somewhat vague language that exists in there currently. Next slide, please. So impact on deliverables. This is going to impact the subcontractor performance report and the subcontractor CAP notice deliverables. Okay, next slide. And so now that I've gone through all those proposed changes, we have some questions for you all. The first one is, what questions or concerns do you have regarding these changes? Do you have any suggestions for improvements? And if these changes are implemented, what guidance and support would you like to receive from OHA? I'll open it up. Nick.
Hi, Summer. Excuse me. Thank you for going through these. So I just had a quick question back to the delegated entity. So for the purpose of the SPR, we don't actually have to address the delegated entities. We don't have to audit them, I guess. They won't be included. We just need to make sure the subcontractors are monitoring their performance. Am I hearing that right?
Exactly. You got it.
And then regarding kind of the CAP or other remediation activity, I just want to make sure I understand, because there's, quite frankly, there can be kind of a broad spectrum of kind of feedback that we might give to a subcontractor. So are you saying anytime that we provide any sort of an email or we audit something and find something and we're communicating with the subcontractor to fix something, you also want that reported in basically real time, in addition to the SPR? Is that, I mean, and I...
The SPRs, but the CAP is due within 30 days or other remediation activity. Yes, anytime you're finding or something that needs to be corrected, be it a policy is missing language, what are you doing to take steps to remediate that with the subcontractor? That should be documented and shared
with OHA, and then we basically follow the current rules for a corrective action plan, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay. I guess my only concern on that is that, again, there's kind of a broad range of things, like, and to me, some of them are not earth-shattering issues that we might ask for correction. So I just think you might get a lot of stuff, and I just wonder the value of OHA having all that when some of these things may not be super major, I guess, is all. So that's my only bit of feedback on that one.
Hey, Nick, just to follow up on that, is there any, like, I don't know if, and maybe this isn't just a question for you, Nick, this is a question maybe for everyone, but I'd love to understand if you all kind of have some threshold, basically, where you might be differentiating between the level of remediation. So, you know, that point at which something kind of rises to a formal remediation or corrective action.
Well, I guess that's what I mean. I mean, because we give feedback I mean, if we're reviewing policies and find something, that's one thing. I mean, that could literally be a word or a OAR missing. So so to me, that seems pretty minor. When we're reviewing NOABDs, we might find missing phrases or it's not readability, and so that's a little bit more. Or we might do a full audit and there's a big, you know, performance issue, you know, timeliness, let's say, for turning around appeals and grievances. So it just seems like there's a range. And so to me, like a minor policy thing is not that big of a deal. Whereas, you know, if they're not using the correct NOAB template or something like that, and we now do that through, I mean, to me, and I think I've shared this with you all, like to get a formal corrective action, that seems like a pretty big deal. So this, I mean, I like what you're getting at. I just think there are some things that are pretty minor that wouldn't necessarily, in my opinion, need to be shared with OHA, and it could just be part of. And again, what I try to do is mention all of that in the SPR, which is kind of where I'm getting to all this. So that's just kind of my thing. So anyway, I think there is a gamut. To your question, I don't think I can answer it right now as far as a threshold, and I could think about it more. But I think that would be hard to define. But I just think the intent of kind of having every single bit of feedback we give to a subcontractor could become burdensome for both the CCOs and OHA.
All of us, yeah. I think that maybe that's a point of conversation that, and I feel like that's probably something that could be laid out in the guidance and evaluation criteria for the deliverable itself. But that's probably something that we can work through and maybe have a conversation to see if maybe there's some kind of set of criteria basically that we want to identify that might require kind of trigger that reporting basically to OHA.
I think that will be helpful. Thank you.
Oren, do you want to go ahead? Nope. Looks like Oren put your hand down. If you want to chime in, please feel free to do so. I don't see any other hands. Let's see if there's anything in the chat.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah, feel free.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, I didn't know I was muted on the phone as well. For the downstream entity list for subcontractors, I wanted to confirm, is that list still following the same definition that we have for listing on our subcontractor list of those that are performing work, capital W work that's in our contract that we've delegated to that subcontractor? Or did I hear that it was broader than that?
No, it's only for delegated contract work.
Okay, thank you. And then yes, would echo Nick's concerns on trying to not overwhelm both us as well as OHA with information that isn't of a significant concern or remediation process with a third party. And similarly for Trillium, we have scenarios where automatically a cap is issued or a cure notice is issued requiring remediation within 30 days. And there's other scenarios where it's, okay, you didn't perform ideally this month, we need to improve that next month. What are you going to do to fix that? So I think further defining any additional information and kind of what's in scope for the other remediation activities would make sense, and would definitely echo the sort of additional administrative burden that puts on the health plans to add to the volume of information we have to put in the same structure and process as the cap notices for the state currently.
Thank you for sharing that, Oren. So it sounds like, based on Nick and Oren's concerns that they raised, that providing that information to OHA within 30 days is really burdensome, but perhaps notating it on the SPR would be acceptable.
I think that's another potential option. I think still further defining what needs to be captured there, because again, it can be very broad from an email communication to something more formal with the way it's currently defined, that you kind of also run into questions of, we might have partners that we work with where we have a higher performance level expectation on them in contract than OHA has on us, because we want to perform at a next level better. So does that fall in scope of, if they're meeting OHA requirements but not our contractual requirements, then is that within scope?
Yeah, no, I wouldn't consider those additional requirements in scope for this purpose.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anne?
Maybe I'm not quite following. What are we trying to solve here? What is OHA's intent? Do you guys plan to monitor this, provide us feedback? I mean, keeping in alignment with the deliverable alignment stuff and making sure we're turning in stuff that's going to go someplace and something's going to happen with it. Can you explain maybe a little bit, what are we trying to solve here and what are you all going to do with this information?
Yes, we've just seen a number of issues with the corrective action process that plans are undergoing. There's been a lot of inconsistencies across plans as far as how they're approaching that, and a lot of root cause are missing from those. And if you're not, directly addressing the root cause of the deficiency, then it's unlikely to be corrected. in the future and can continuously repeat, which is not something that we want for our members. And so, yeah, OHA does want to monitor the corrective action process as it's ongoing, so that we can help weigh in and make sure that certain things are being addressed and are timely. That's the other thing that we found, is that some corrective action processes that the plans are undergoing are taking years instead of months or weeks that they should be taking. So that's another issue to contend with. So we just want to keep a closer eye on those corrective actions, and that is really the goal and the intent here.
So can we maybe have that approach then? Can we ask for that approach, that we all sit down and talk about what we're all doing for corrective actions and try to get some alignment? It feels like just all of us turning in volumes of stuff is not going to get us what you're all looking for.
Definitely open to that conversation, Ann.
And Cynthia, it looks like you have your hand up. Do you want to go ahead?
Thank you, Veronica. Good morning, everybody. Hi, Summer. I think I agree with Ann. I think that if we could just, whoops, hold on. If we could just land on some criteria. I mean, we don't put a subcontractor on a corrective action plan unless it rises to the level that, you know, they are engrossed. They're not following what needs to be done. And it doesn't just happen at audit time. I mean, we're monitoring them on a quarterly basis, so there could be issues with access, for instance. But I agree with Ann, if we could just land on some of the, like a criteria or some of the issues that would spur or, you know, cause a corrective action plan to be put into place, I think it would just be better. It would be better for everyone, not just us, but you all trying to oversee that. It does add steps. If we can't land, we're going to be sending things that we just don't know. Is this what you want? Is that what you want? Again, to me, it's access during an audit. If they don't have like OIG checks, that kind of thing, that would cause that generating a corrective action plan. So in as much as we can all understand and agree on, you know, and it doesn't have to be totally specific, but just general, I think it would just make everybody understand what we need to do. But I appreciate the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. I think we have time for maybe one more. And
We have several items in the chat. I don't know if we're kind of all echoing some of the concerns that we've heard already vocalized by several of you. And I think we will definitely revisit. I think we'll definitely see what we can put forward. We welcome your feedback, first of all, written feedback, so that we can identify how to modify the requirements. I think, as Summer said, we want to make sure that there is oversight of these downstream entities. How we get there, I think, you know, we can, if you all have ideas about that, feel free to submit your written feedback. And then we will probably circle back in the future at a contracts and compliance meeting to talk about, have a more focused conversation around what everyone's process is for CAPS. Summer, is there anything else you want to add?
no, just making sure you can hear me. My Teams totally crashed. I apologize.
Yes, I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay.
No worries.
All right. I just signed back in. Okay, this next one is not as significant as the last. So hello again, presenting changes to the Exhibit I grievance system portion of the contract. And these changes also apply to all contracts. Again, we're looking to define the term downstream entity, and then we're going to include that term, or at least its intent, within contracts such that CCOs shall cause their subcontractors and downstream entities to comply with all the grievance and appeal system requirements where applicable. Subcontractors shall perform oversight of those downstream entities and ensure that downstream entity data is included within the grievance system quarterly reporting submitted by CCOs to OHA. Next slide. So we're making these changes in 2025 just to clarify OHA's expectations of CCOs in regard to downstream entities. Again, ensuring those CCO subcontractors are regularly monitoring their downstream entities that are performing any contractual grievance system related work, and holding them to the same expectations, rules, requirements, and timelines and such as the subcontractor. And again, ensure that their data is included in the grievance system reporting. These changes just clarify the existing contract requirements for 2025 and beyond. Next slide. Okay, so these changes are going to impact some of the grievance system deliverables, including the grievance system reports, the grievance and appeal log, samples of NOABDs and their corresponding prior auth documents, and all NOABDs for applied behavioral analysis and Hep C. Next slide. Okay, and just a couple questions for you all. Do you feel confident that currently all downstream entity data is currently included within your quarterly reporting? And of course, what questions or concerns do you have regarding these proposed revisions? And I think we have time for just one or two questions, and then we'll carry on.
I don't see anything in the chat, and I don't see any hands up. So Lindsay just commented that UHA already has this downstream entities included in their submission.
Perfect.
Is that the case for many of you?
Yeah, Veronica, this is Nick. I guess that was my only comment, is I feel like we're already kind of doing this.
Yeah.
Or I don't see this as an issue for us, but so, which is great, but I'm not aware of this being a problem for us.
Okay. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Laura. Also offered that All Care also has this information included in their logs already. Same for YCCO. All right. There is any feedback on that, please submit it to the HSD Quality Assurance mailbox. I would appreciate that. All right, I think it's back to Cheryl.
Yes, it's back to me. So, and thank you, Alex, for that last comment there. So last but not least, we have our final presentation for today, and I think we'll have about maybe 10 minutes total for presentation and discussion, more or less. We have Sarah and Devlin from HPA to talk about adding Healthier Oregon CCO members to the CCO Quality Incentive Program. I see Devlin, and I know Sarah. Let's see, oh, there's Sarah's box. I see that. So take it away.
Thanks, Cheryl. So I'm Sarah Kleinschmidt. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the lead metrics program manager here at OHA. Devlin, you want to introduce yourself as well?
Hi, Devlin Behem. I'm a senior policy analyst in HPA in the Office of Health Policy, and I help out on the Healthier Oregon program.
Oh, you are ahead of me, Cheryl. So for those of you who may be less aware, through the Quality Incentive Program, CCOs earn millions of dollars in bonuses each year for markedly improving care on a set of healthcare quality metrics for members of the Oregon Health Plan that you all serve. But while we at OHA, we track performance for Healthier Oregon program members, Healthier Oregon program members whose care is managed by CCOs are currently excluded from the Quality Incentive Program. And we don't think that we should do that. You are serving these members just like you serve your other Oregon Health Plan members. CCOs have been managing care for these folks for some time now, and we think that they should be included in the program. So when I say included in the program, what does that mean? So it means that when we calculate how a CCO performs on a given measure, so think about ensuring that kids receive their immunizations, we would no longer exclude kiddos whose CCO care is funded by the Healthier Oregon program. We would include them. So important things to note as you think through this proposed change. We would need to include language about this in both the Medicaid and the non-Medicaid contracts. And really importantly, doing this is contingent upon funding availability. So we would not include these members in assessments of whether CCOs earn these bonuses without commensurate funding being available for the program. So there is a policy option package that the legislature will be considering in 2025 that would allow us to do this. And if that funding isn't available, then we would not include Healthier Oregon program members in assessments of whether CCOs earn the incentive payments. And I think another important point is to note that we really see this as an initial change as part of a longer term multi-year effort of expanding the incentive program to include all CCO members. But we would start with this contract for 2025 and with Healthier Oregon program members. And so I'll turn it over to Devlin, who's going to talk about why we think it's important to do this now for 2025.
Yeah, so next slide. So yeah, as Sarah was talking, we want to make this change now in order to move forward with OHA's goal of eliminating health inequities. As many of you know, Healthier Oregon members have been already receiving CCO services since July of 2022. And then just in July of 2023, it expanded to all ages. And Healthier Oregon members are OHP members, and so should be treated in a similar manner as other OHP members. And this is the incentive program remains one of the few ways that Healthier Oregon members are distinguished from other OHP members. And we think that's an inequity, and we want to move forward with that. Next slide. So the major impact that you all would see is that CCOs, you all would report your EHR measures differently. Currently, we ask CCOs to exclude Healthy Oregon members from reporting, but then this change hopefully simplifies everything and you would report all of your members to OHA, and then OHA would work to confirm non-Medicaid members are in the EHR source materials. This wouldn't impact the measures from other data sources. Next slide. Oh, there we go. And Sarah?
It looks like that's the wrong slide. Yeah, can we go to our, do we have our question slide? Yeah, that's not the right slide. Perfect. Thank you. So definitely we are interested in getting your thoughts on this proposal overall. I also, so I'm kind of starting at the bottom, number 3, and then working up. And then we do also want to get your feedback on more weedy questions. So for example, Devlin was just talking about our assessment. We think that this will actually make it a bit easier in terms of reporting for the electronic health record based metrics. But we want to hear from you if you disagree with that. And then also really importantly, as I had mentioned before, this is really contingent upon funding being available. And there's a policy option package with the 2025 legislature. And so we would know if that is approved, we would know that by the end of session, so in June 2025. So I'm thinking about operations with the program, for you all, at what time would you need to know if funding is available, and we would be including those members in our assessments of CCO performance. I'll note for you all that in terms of the individual targets that each CCO has to meet, those are released in July of each year, so this may align with that. And the reason they're released in July is because of claims run out and we have a validation period where we work with you all So potentially this would align with that, but we are really interested in hearing from you on, well, when do you need to know within that performance year that yes, these members would be included in your assessments of how you perform on each of these measures. So I'm going to stop talking and want to hear from you all. So question in the chat, which is, would the metrics and scoring committee rebase benchmarks for CCO targets if the Healthier Oregon program population is added into the measure program? So Kali, it would be a little bit in between that. So it wouldn't be the benchmark that would be rebased, but it would be the baseline that we use when we calculate those individual targets that CCOs have to meet. We would recalculate the previous year with Healthier Oregon program members, and that would be included in what the individual targets are for the CCOs. What other questions do folks have?
This is Jenna.
I'm just gonna...
Oh, sorry. I was gonna,
Oh,
looks like Larry was gonna jump in too. Well, so this is Jenna with Yamhill CCO. I think that we would need to go back and really look. So I think based on the various systems that are collecting, whether it's Athena or Epic or other types of mechanisms by which those ECQM measures are actually calculated, we would need to work with our providers to just make sure. I think for the most part, those populations are already embedded, but I think there are some impacts that we would need to do some assessment to understand if there are provider impacts that we would need to take into consideration that would draw out that timeline by which providers would be able to update their systems and how that data is captured. So those are my initial thoughts. I don't think it's undoable. I think that the timeline piece would be dependent on that provider impact and not just the provider, but the EHR systems by which the providers use for those data collection.
Thank you.
Larry, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I want to comment and one question. The comment I'd reinforce, we'll just put in chat as well, that ideally we would know about this before the end of 2024 for the sake of contracting with providers, because some of our contracting does include or exclude certain populations in regards to quality measures, so there would be an impact there. And then the question side of things is, are we solely talking about HOP here, or are we talking about anything in the non-Medicaid contract, such as the COFA and VETS CCOF?
So we're talking for this contract, specifically Healthier Oregon program members. With those other non-Medicaid funded folks, that potentially might be something that we're able to do in the future, and we're interested in having that, but we would have to be able to identify funding. Whereas for the Healthier Oregon program population, there is a policy option package that will be considered for funding for this. So good question.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to call out the note in the chat. This is an answer to the first question. Ideally, we EOCCO would want to know if HOP members are included in measurement year 2025 by the end of 2024, so we can provide accurate reporting to our clinics for the full measurement year. So I do want to talk about that with folks, because I just being really transparent, we won't know about funding until session. So we wouldn't know by the beginning of 2024. We do share with CCOs a quarterly dashboard, and in that I identify Healthier Oregon program members. So in terms of tracking performance, that would be available. But the just full transparency for you all to consider as you think through this, the earliest by which we would know if we have funding would be at the end of the next legislative session. So that would be in June of 2025. I am going to don't want to drop off conversation. Definitely want to talk with you, hear more about this from you all today. But as you have more thoughts and as you reflect and talk with internal folks, please email me your thoughts. We want to hear from you. So I'm going to put my email in the chat. Sorry, Teams is being very slow for me. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and call it done for this set of presentations. Thank you, Devlin, Sarah. And like I mentioned earlier, we will follow up this meeting invite with all the information about where to send your feedback on the 6 presentations. And I'll also follow up on my own distribution list about the contract changes. And again, the deadline for feedback about the specific changes is end of this week. So thank you all very much. And Veronica, thank you for the extra time. We appreciate it. And I'll sign off.
Thank you, Cheryl. All right, we are going to transition to our next item on the agenda. This is, again, a conversation specific to HRSN services. A few of you have raised several questions about HRSN services that might be denied but later covered through HRS, health-related services. So we wanted to, we provided some questions in advance for you all to consider and think through. And so I wanted to maybe just kick off with that discussion, and primarily what I'm interested in maybe understanding through this conversation is, as you can see outlined in the questions, but really understanding your process. So what is, once something is denied as an HRSN service, has a covered benefit, kind of what's the workflow and the process after that denial takes place. And primarily, we're trying to understand if there is consistency across CCOs in terms of how that denied service is going to be treated, given that health-related services is, optional and not really a covered benefit. So you all kind of have discretion in terms of what you do and do not cover for HRS. So wanted to just kind of talk through that, and I won't take up too much time going through the discussion questions, but I'm going to open it up for folks. We also invited you to provide any additional questions that you might have that we may need to work through and think about as we roll out these benefits. So I'm going to open it up to you all and see if anyone has anything that they would want to share regarding their process. And this is going to be really helpful for us to make some decisions around whether NOABDs are going to be required related to something that's covered through HRS. Jane, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. We are going to process automatically if we are going to transfer it over to the HRS folks in our company if an HRSN service is denied. However, there could be times when it won't be covered under HRS either, such as the member's not, enrolled anymore or other such factors. We're not waiting for an appeal. We're going to do that automatically. So I think that's how we're going to handle it.
Sorry, I was trying to get to people and accidentally raised my hand. So I think I see someone else. Angela, do you want to go ahead and offer your feedback?
Definitely. So this is Angela with Trillium CCO. How we're planning on doing it is if a member is denied through the HRSN benefit, we'll still be sending out the denial and appeal information to the members, but simultaneously be working with the member to see if they could qualify under HRS, so under flex funds. And it'll be most likely those members that are not in like the transition population, but still have clinical risk factors. So of course it'll be a case by case, but we still want our team that oversees our flex funds to be outreaching the member before they even receive that initial denial letter, to let them know, you will be receiving the denial letter and how to appeal. But we're reaching out to you to go through the flex fund process to see if you qualify that route. And that's essentially how we're going to be handling ours. We haven't had that situation yet. All of our climate device, HRS, and flex funds that have come in so far have been approved. So we'll see how it works when we actually get some that are denied through HRSN.
I see Lindsay. Do you want to jump in?
And mirror everything Angela said, pretty much. Our same HRSN team is our flex team, so they would do the review simultaneously. And our thoughts, because the NOABD is required still, is that we would add what I like to think of it as like the comorbidity statement. But in that, we would say, if it was still denied, we would have language that said it was also reviewed under our flexible spending benefit, and you do not meet, and or, it was also reviewed under our flexible spending benefit, and you do meet, and it will be sent to you. That same language, but because the NOABD was required, then we would still send it, but let it know that it would be covered under a different benefit, which could be very confusing to the member. So, yeah, I'm hoping OHA can take that into consideration, and we would be able to just send perhaps a flex approval, and let them know that maybe it went through the HRSN process, but didn't meet. However, you did meet under flex, and here's your approval notice. That makes sense.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for those comments. Let's see. I think I saw something just pop up in the chat. So 2 items, one from EOCCO. EOCCO would still send a denial, but add language stating that this would be approved through HRS, as that sounds like that review might happen simultaneously. And feel free to jump in with any clarification, Christina. And then HealthShare has a similar approach. It sounds like potentially what Lindsay was describing. All denied HRSN requests will be reprocessed as HRS. We understand that we have to issue an NOABD for the benefit, even if the request is covered under HRS. Not having to issue an NOABD would be preferable if the service is then covered under HRS. We will also have language similar to what Lindsay is describing. And we have Chanel offering some feedback. Same kind of process and thinking here, and we will always process to see if a request qualifies as HRSN first, and if not, there's a denial, but we would attempt to process as HRS instead. Thank you all for sharing those thoughts. I'm interested in maybe understanding some of the exclusions that might exist related to if something is denied as an HRSN benefit, then you move it to kind of that review process through HRS. What might exclude someone? So what would maybe be denied through the HRS benefit? And I know that obviously it's a case-by-case basis, but if there is some general kind of criteria that you might be able to offer, that might be really helpful. I think what I'm looking to understand is how often, so can in all instances in which a HRSN denied benefit is transferred over to HRS, will it be covered a majority of the time, or not, right? And I think that question maybe will help us understand if there is some level of consistency across CCOs, because we might be able to make an argument, kind of reflecting on the CFR language around an adverse benefit determination. If something is covered, but it's just covered through a separate source, basically, that this optional process through HRS, that we can potentially, and obviously this is going to require some conversation with CMS folks, but we can potentially make the argument that the benefit is being covered. It's just through a separate funding mechanism and source. And so that's really where I'm trying to kind of get at some of these questions, to really try to understand some of the nuances in terms of when we might have when we might see that certain folks are excluded from that HRS approval. I see some hands going up. Let me check and see who we have here. We have Kimberly first and then Jean. Do you want to go ahead, Kimberly?
Yeah, this is Kim from Care Oregon. So what we're doing is sort of similar to what's already been shared. We're reviewing simultaneously for Flex and for HRSN benefits. Where it's a little bit different is that we are aligning the criteria. So the clinical risk factors that apply for HRSN are also being utilized for HRSF. So in theory, if the clinical risk factor was the rationale for the denial, then we could see where we would also deny under Flex.
And so you are going to be applying the same clinical guidelines, I guess, in the review process for HRS as you would under HRSN.
We are.
Okay. That's helpful. Jean, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, this is Jean. No, you're fine. Veronica, I want to, for the climate devices, I don't see a big issue. But when it comes to housing and the amount of services that someone could be eligible through HRSN, and if it's denied and it goes to HRS, if almost every member from clinical consideration can get the 6 months of rent, can get moving costs, can get utilities, can get on and on with what HRSN for that special population, because what I understand is that was designed because of these vulnerable populations. Then if then we're saying we can go ahead and qualify them here and give them all of these services, then doesn't it dilute? Like, what is the point of doing this benefit and this eligibility in the first place for this special population that we're trying to really focus on to help become stable?
I'm not sure I have a response to that, but I think it's definitely a worthwhile question to think about.
I know I can chime in maybe. John, one consideration is that I know there was some concern that HRSN might be too narrowly focused because of the qualifications that are required in order to receive the services, and the expectation that there may be additional members that could benefit from these services that don't qualify through HRSN. And I think some of what we're trying to get a handle on is, to what degree can HRS help fill some of those gaps? And that's where we're looking to you to see, is that the case? Do you find that there's a broader population within your members that you could potentially identify? And is that a reasonable expectation?
Yeah, thank you. It definitely is. I guess my question is, if that occurs with the housing and the nutrition, will there be additional funding for the HRSF Flex? If OHA is considering that there's other populations, because I understand that the HRSN is coming from a waiver and a separate funding source. And so it can go into the millions if we're thinking about the housing benefit and qualifying for that. And yes, CCOs do help with housing right now, definitely. But I'm just thinking about the enormous amount of funding that could happen.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that. I think that's part of why we wanted to have to initiate this conversation here, to see, what are the key questions and key considerations as we move forward with this, because obviously we want to make sure that this is something that we can manage, but also to the degree that we can leverage the existing use of HRS to support some of this work we want to.
Yeah, and I'd like to throw in, with climate, we're mirroring, I think, like a lot of other CCOs, as far as HRSF criteria is the same as HRSN for climate, with exception of the transitioning population, where our housing HRSF criteria is different, and is, has more limitations, and we have our own kind of set internal criteria. While we might mirror that clinical risk factors, there are other factors that are also involved for flex. So if we're not standardizing maybe specifically what the HRSF, I think it's kind of comparing maybe apples to oranges a little bit if we say we're going to do the same for climate as we would for housing. Just a thought to throw out there. But I do look forward to, if we are covering the benefit under flex, whether it be any of the HRSN benefits, it would help the member for sure to not have that extra barrier of a denial notice, kind of getting back to the conversation at root. And then, the efforts to fill out an appeal when they're already getting the service, right, through a different benefit. So it saves on admin functions and all that as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I think, I hear a lot of good intentions and really trying to maximize our support for our members. But I think from a pragmatic perspective, there's also the piece that this is a covered benefit, and there's a need for certain continuity in how we treat covered benefits. So we would not automatically, I'm just going to be extreme in my example, wouldn't automatically send a review to HRS if we denied an MRI for not meeting medical necessity. So it feels like maybe we're trying to shoehorn in some of the gaps in what we would have liked to have seen that maybe wasn't approved by CMS. And I don't know that the CCOs can fix what CMS said no to. And I know it's more complex than that, but I think we need to anchor to the reality of what it is and what it isn't, and how we can really focus on maximizing that. And it's not to say that there won't be situations where it's like, yeah, this is really appropriate for HRS. But I think it's also fair to say that it's not going to fill all the gap. And I hope that we can have a shared understanding and around that, so that maybe there's not ongoing friction or abrasion around this particular topic. I get a little concerned about some of the messaging that's gone out to partners and the communities, and there's some distinct confusion festering in those settings, and it feels like we're having to, it's almost making the CCOs the bad guys for not being all things to all people. And so that's where I think we can collaborate around the messaging so we don't create that confusion. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're definitely looking in the same direction on this. I think the one distinction that I think is worth noting, though, is that, as has been mentioned, some CCOs are already providing some of these services through HRS that are now going to become HRSN services that may be, in some cases, more strict or more expansive in terms of what's being provided. And so part of this is trying to manage that transition and enabling the CCOs to continue to provide services as they think are appropriate for their members across what is now 2 programs without creating undue burden along the way. But I totally understand what you're saying. I mean, it's not we're not looking for the CCOs to say everything we didn't cover in HRSN, make sure you covered in HRS. That's not the ask here. I think it's more about trying to clarify what makes sense for you and how can we best manage this moving forward so that it isn't overly confusing or more confusing might be more appropriate to say, but so that we can ensure that the members understand what's available and what they're being, what services are available to them.
Thanks, Dave. And I think it might be also helpful for you all to share if you're hearing different messaging from within the agency. I think that feedback is also very helpful for us to have some conversations internally. I see Jane's hand up, and I know we have a lot of comments in the chat. I'm not going to be able to go through all of them, but I do appreciate those comments, and we will kind of take all of that feedback all together and kind of consider have some additional discussions to see where we land on this, and we'll bring it back and actually probably update the guidance document for HRSN to include some of the requirements specific to the NOABD. Jane, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. I think part of the problem I'm having as to whether or not we have to send an NOABD is the fact that if we're denying the service because they're not in one of those populations, wouldn't they always have the ability to appeal that and be able to have their status determined on appeal? So I think there's
meaning a reconsideration of whether they are a part of the covered population. Is that where?
Correct. So if the CCO is saying you don't qualify for this service because you're not in the covered population, the member should always have the ability to appeal that determination so that they can receive other benefits, because if they actually do qualify or think they do or have other records to submit that could help support that.
Yeah, I would agree with that to the degree that there is additional evidence or documentation that might make a case for that member.
And so it would need to cover under HRSN rather than HRS. So, and I know it's going to be confusing for the member, so I don't know how we address that. I agree it's going to be very confusing for the member. But I want to make sure their rights are protected as well.
Angela, your hand just went up. Do you want to chime in on this?
I do. I think for the climate devices, it will be easier to transition over to the HRS benefit. I think the most confusing HRSN benefit will be the housing. We're internally still trying to figure out how we want to handle the housing requests that get denied specifically. And I don't know if any other CCOs are at this point yet, but looking at only approving like rental assistance through the benefit and not offering it through the flex fund health related services route. Because I think that's where it will get really confusing if we follow that same process of reviewing for both flex fund and HRS benefit at the same time, sending out a denial while we're still trying to approve through HRS. I think that's going to confuse the members, providers, community members that are trying to support members. Because I know for us, I think we would really like to lean on the housing one to be specifically just through the HRSN benefit that can be appealed and not create that additional confusion.
Thank you so much, Angela. And we are over time here, so I appreciate all of the feedback, and I think we will definitely bring this back. Maybe it sounds like there's more discussion to be had, especially as we think through the individual benefits that are going to be covered under HRSN. So appreciate all the feedback and discussion. We, as I mentioned, will look at everything in the chat and kind of have some follow-up internally around this particular topic as it relates to NOABDs. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Appreciate it, and we will see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.